welcome to another episode of the Alley Report. Today we're talking with T.L. Bodine, author of River of Souls, House of Lazarus, Neverest, and The Hound. And I've known TL for years. We go way back, Wattpad days and everything. And yeah, so glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. One of your most recent one was a Neverest, which is about like a doomed Everest expedition and the aftermath. And
Mhm,
uh,
mhm.
do you also have like I have like an obsession with Everest expeditions that go wrong?
I read so many of them when I was gearing up to write it. It was funny because Mount Everest is one of those things that I never really like gave two thoughts about until I had stumbled upon some, like weird facts article that was talking about, the bodies that are left up on Mount Everest. And for some reason, that had never occurred to me before that moment. Because of course, that's what happens, but it had never like crossed my mind. And so it's like, well, that's crazy. And so I got to looking into that, and then was finding out, people who will charter expeditions to go recover the bodies, and how dangerous and expensive that is. And so I just got obsessed for a little while of just trying to get in the mindset of like, who will pay tens of thousands of dollars and put their lives or other people's lives or both at risk at a chance to go retrieve a body? Like what brings you to that point? So I read so many like mountaineering memoirs and like was watching documentaries. And so for a brief period, I was just Everest obsessed. I think I've worked it out of my system. We'll see. I do every so often, people will be talking about it in passing, and I just can't help but like pop up with weird Mount Everest factoids now. So that's kind of my life. Um,
Well, like I mean,
but
there was the most recent one where it was two women who were trying to set a record like at the same time, and both ended up being killed on the mountain.
they just stop, guys. Just stop. That's my opinion on it. Like, enough people have climbed it. Just give it a rest, guys. Hey,
Yeah, it is funny like seeing because I've read some like memoirs and stuff too, and like the thing about you train for this and you picture this moment where you're on top of the world, and then when you describe what actually happens, it's like you get to a point like, all right, you're at the top. It's like, all right, go back down. Like there is no, it's you're dying already. You're above the
yeah,
death zone. So your brain's dying.
yeah. You're there for like a minute, and then you got to go back down. You have to stand in line to get up there. Like, it's super crowded. It's just super weird.
And,
Um, yeah.
and it's a
The
good.
other thing that really caught my like, I guess, captured my imagination when I was writing about it is statistically more people die on the descent than climbing. That's when you're most likely to kind of run out of gas and just run into trouble. Because I think like once you hit it, the adrenaline rush kind of starts to wear off, and then you're just really tired, but you have so much climbing left to do to come back down the other side. But I like to pretend it's like, well, okay, sure, but what if there's something keeping you up there? What if there's something that lured you up to the top and now doesn't want you to leave? So,
And like I suppose I read yours, and then Michael Clark did Hell or High Water. So it's like both like Everest horrors, and yeah, it is a good subject and um for that because it's a horrifying enterprise. Like it's just destructive for the environment, destructive for the mountain. People die constantly.
yeah. Yeah. And so much of it is Everest specifically too. Like, it's such a weird thing. Like, you don't really see this. Like, people die obviously summiting other mountains, but the scale is just different because many more people will try to summit Everest. And a
Yeah,
lot of them are people who don't really have any business doing it, you know? Like, some rich business person who's going to pay a Sherpa to basically just haul him up the mountain. You're not a professional climber who's dedicated your life to doing this. You're someone who's like, oh, maybe this will help me sell my self-help book. And that's just putting everybody at danger, in my opinion.
yeah, and absolutely because I've read some people talk about their training. It's like, oh, I decided I was going to do it, so I just I went down to my gym and got on my treadmill, and it was like, how did you make it past base camp?
Right? What are you doing? Yeah.
And also like I'm a huge fan of your two zombie novels, although it does sound reductive almost to what they are, River of Souls and House of Lazarus. And I actually love anything that takes zombies and the zombie tropes and does something interesting with them. And so I was just a big fan of those two.
I am so happy to hear that. I think you're in a small but very very what's the word I'm looking for here? Elite. We'll go with elite. You're in a small but
Yes.
elite group of fans of those books. They never quite, I don't think, have found their audience completely, but the people who have read them have enjoyed them a lot. So I'll take it. Um, but yeah, so just for people watching that are not familiar with the concept, it's House of Lazarus is the sequel to River of Souls. There's a third book in the works that I'm hoping to get out soon-ish. It's going to be called Cage of Bones. But the basic premise is it's a zombie event is reanimating people, but they come back still in possession of their faculties. They're basically human, except they're just actively decaying, and the government is kind of trying to shepherd them off into, um, you know, their own little like camps, I guess, and kind of keep that tamp down so they're not mingling with normal people and they're regulating them all. And so there's the main character, his name's Davin, and he's trying really hard to hide that he's dead because he doesn't want to lose custody of his little sister that he's taking care of. And so he just kind of falls into like this weird group or assemblage of other undead that are trying to live under the radar, and things just get bad for everyone involved. Um, but yeah, no, they're a ton of fun to write. They're really close to my heart. It's not probably super shocking if you've read them that in some ways, like it's not a one-to-one metaphor by any means, but they are definitely a book that I have used to kind of grapple with thinking about chronic illness and disability and kind of the way that people who are chronically and incurably ill get kind of sidelined by the system and all of the abuses therein. Um, I lost my dad last year, but it was at the tail end of a very, very long chronic illness like that. And so I kind of channeled a lot of those feelings of kind of growing up with someone in that position, and kind of seeing just how crappy that whole thing was for everyone involved. It's like, well, maybe I can just sublimate that into a book about zombies, and that will be more enjoyable. So we'll do that. Everything's more fun with zombies, right? So
Yeah. Um, yeah, 'cause that's one thing that impressed me about it was all the different layers to it that, having to hide, having become a zombie, and um, questions about, a potential cure or something that can manage it and whether that actually is. And also, like, in, I think, House of Lazarus, running into a camp of zombies and like what happens when you are, it's like I said, sidelined by society and you're living out wild and there's almost this feral state. I don't. It was such a creepy moment to me. Just literally them just driving through this part of the desert for a little bit. It was so eerie.
thank you. Yeah, that's the other thing that's great, for me writing those books in particular is I kind of call them like a New Mexico Gothic. I live in
Yeah.
Albuquerque, and New Mexico is just really special. I've traveled all over the place when I was a kid, and chose to come back to New Mexico of all places because there's just something weird about it. But I tried to pour just as much New Mexico as I possibly could into those books just to give it, this texture and try to capture some of that weird magic that is just the desert and the poverty and the people and all of the like mismatch of cultures and just everybody poured into one location. So whenever I'm feeling, kind of the muse is running dry on those books in particular, I'll just go out for a drive, like just hop on one of the backcountry highways and just go somewhere and see, what's going on out there. And there's always something weird going on out there. So
Yeah, the Southwest is its own. Anytime I've driven through New Mexico, Arizona, especially New Mexico, yeah, there is absolutely an atmosphere to it.
yeah, absolutely. It's good to drive through. Like we've got a lot of highways. We've got I-40 and I-25 and I-10 are all crisscrossing through there. So if you want to go anywhere important, you're gonna pass through New Mexico at some point, for the most part. And there's just so many like little weird towns that kind of time forgot, and so much just bizarre landscape. One of my other things that I love about New Mexico is if you drive in like 3 hours in any direction, you end up in a completely different biome. And
Yeah.
so, you're like, yeah, we'll be in like flat, scrubby desert. And then, oh, hey, mountains. And then you keep going. Oh, there's a pine forest. Oh, here's some rock formations. Like everything you want. We even have a beach, no ocean, but we do have a beach at White Sands. So that's
Yep.
something.
I've been to White Sands, and it was funny. Was I drove through the portion that was the pine forest, like that Lincoln County area,
Oh,
and
yeah.
when the girls were young, and we did a trip across the Southwest, and I remember like you know my wife was like, "What if we just stayed here?" And like as we were just driving through, like, "What if we just let's just stay here?"
It is beautiful over there. Was it before or after the forest fire
It
that
was before the
oh,
fires.
okay. Yeah, it's a little bit more bleak driving through there because there's a ton of fire and just wiped out a bunch of the forest. But it's starting to kind of seedlings back up. So give it
Yeah,
another couple years and it should be normal again, hopefully.
yeah. I mean, it's like you said, it's just a fascinating. There's just so much there. When you drive through it, like I said, it really feels like you're going these three major areas, these three different worlds, and you got Roswell,
Mhm.
plus also like two other UFO crashes. Like,
There is so much weirdness in New Mexico. So I had gotten invited to an anthology that I can't probably talk super much about, but the rough pitch is kind of local folklore of everybody's areas.
love
And,
that kind of stuff.
in New Mexico, like you have to be real careful because I'm pretty sparkling white. And it's like, okay, all of your obvious local folklores kind of feel a little bit off limits to me. Like, I'm not going to write like a La Llorona story. I'm not going to write a
Yeah,
Skinwalker story. Like, that's not my place. And so I was digging deeper to see just what other kind of just weirdness and local urban legends and superstitions are in New Mexico. And my God, there are so many weird ones. So one of them, that for some reason I think this will really appeal to you. Have you heard about the pterodactyls?
yes.
Yeah, yeah. So apparently, people as recently as like the 1830s in the newspaper, somewhat legitimately, were reporting pterodactyl sightings in southern New Mexico, which is completely wild. I think there's probably been more contemporary reports that are probably not in the newspaper. I don't know what it is that they're seeing. Like, I don't know if somebody saw like a California condor that got lost and they just let their imagination get away with them, or if it's just, I don't know, the land before time down there and I didn't know. But that's wild. And then there's like the bottomless lakes where supposedly if you drop something in one lake, it will turn up in a different one, even though they're not connected to each other.
Oh, I love that. I love
So
like a
what's up with
secret
that?
subterranean.
Yeah. Yeah. Supposedly people will like lose things in one of the lakes and it'll turn up in Carlsbad Caverns, which is like a couple hours away. Just wild.
And itself just epic. I've been there too, and like it's insanely huge.
We should road trip. I think that would be the best possible use of our time. We'll just hop in the car,
Yes,
just go weird stuff road trip. Let's do it.
absolutely.
We'll New Mexico, West Texas, there's all kinds of weirdness in there. We'll just go on down.
Yeah, because that's like when I went across there, it was like we took like the lower portion, the lower I forget the highway names, but I think we took the lower portion going to California and then the upper one coming back. And I just tried to map out through like roadside American stuff every weird thing that we could possibly stop and see. And
Did you see the thing?
oh, absolutely. The thing was just it was something else. And not only the thing, but then like there's like a torture museum connected to the thing. And there's like
Yes.
there's like
Yes.
it's like me and my wife and our two at that time toddler age children's like this is how they tortured people. Like, take it in, kids. It was
I
amazing.
love that. Yeah, I growing up, my dad worked construction. He was a union boilermaker, and so it was one of those things. We lived in a motorhome because you'd go to these short turnaround jobs, and so the union hall would call you up and be like, "Hey, we've got this job. It's here's the terms. Can you make it there in 3 days or whatever?" And so you just pack it up and you drive across the country to go to whatever the place was. And so a lot of those jobs were in California, and so we spent a lot of time driving between New Mexico and California along all those either I-40 or I think it's I-10 on the south. You drive through, and one of the things is I was obsessed as a kid with the thing because those billboards start like 500 miles away. And so if you've ever, driven down that highway, there's nothing. Just imagine a big wide expanse of empty desert. And then there's these big yellow billboards that just say the thing.
Yeah.
What is it? And so I'm sitting in the back of my car at like 8, going, I don't know, what is it? Can we stop? I want to go see the thing. We never stopped to see the thing. I was so disappointed. It's like, okay, as soon as I'm old enough to drive, we are going and we're seeing the thing. I want to know what it's about. So,
Yeah. And like the pterodactyls and stuff. I There's this whole thing about like the story of the Thunderbird photograph, which some say it's take place in Arizona or New Mexico, and that's the one thing I'm obsessed with. Like too, is like, was it a real photograph? Did it actually exist?
right. And
Um,
now, I mean, you couldn't really get anybody with that. I feel like at this point, everyone's like, it's probably AI generated, whatever. Like it'd be
yeah,
impossible
yeah,
to get any kind of credulity about that. But
yeah. It's like,
that's how they get you. They're going to sneak up on you. Now that they've lulled us into, complacency, now the Thunderbirds and the pterodactyls are going to come meet us.
yeah, yeah. And I love the idea of the whole lost world in the West and all of that. Oh, also like in addition to like your novels, your Patreon. Like I've more than once talked it up because I love your essays. Like I think your most recent one was on the color out of space, Lovecraft, where you've covered like rats because you are yourself like you have your rats and winter ghost stories, creepy kids. Like I love those deep dives into specific tropes and stuff in the horror world.
I'm so happy to hear that they are hitting with their kind of ideal audience. Really, I have so much fun writing them because I can't help but think in those terms, and so I'll be watching something or reading something, and then just in the back of my mind, it's like this kind of reminds me of this other weird thing, and so now I have an excuse to kind of indulge that and dig into it and read about it a little bit and kind of just come back with whatever I've been delving for and be like, here's a handful of weird stuff. Please look at it. I
And
was recently rewatching all of the Chucky movies, which I had not done in many, many years. And I had never seen some of the newer ones. I think the last one, I'd seen the first three a couple of times and Bride of Chucky, but I've never seen Seed of Chucky and Curse and Cold, and the series. Like I'm behind on my Chucky. But I was sitting there watching the first three Chucky movies kind of back to back, and it's like, I don't know if this was intentional, and I don't know if this is reading too much into it, but if you think about it, these movies make a surprisingly workable kind of model or metaphor for like child abuse and like grooming and what happens when you don't believe kids because they're maybe a little messy or they don't have the language to describe what's happening to them. Because if you think about it, that's my new pet theory, so I'm taking you on a ride here. But if you think about it, in each of the three movies, we've got Andy in a position that is really kind of commonly associated with being vulnerable to grooming and predation. You've got like the single mom who's poor and she's working, kind of double shifts, and there's always the risk of like bringing in a boyfriend and that causing issues, whatever. And then we've got foster care and all the issues that come with that, and then this military academy and all the issues that come with that. And in every case, we've got this kid who's got this like trusted friend who's supposed to be someone he can count on, who's making him keep secrets for him, and who is trying to like violate his bodily autonomy by literally stealing his body, and is making him ashamed and feel guilty by blaming all this stuff on him, and no one will believe him. And I'm just watching, it's like, this is kind of weirdly profound for a talking doll movie.
yeah,
So
and
maybe I'll write about that next. I don't know.
because I can see that because even how Chucky changes, like in each of those first three, it's kind of a reset. When he first appears to the kid, he's gonna groom whatever. He's this normal looking doll, something you can trust, and then gradually, as he starts to exert control and stuff like that, you see it for what he really is. And yeah, those first three movies would really make that case. I think that gets kind of abandoned like 4 or 5 and onward. But yeah, those first
They
three, I
get
could see that.
increasingly ridiculous for sure.
God, yeah, I love Seed of Chucky. When that came out, I saw that in a theater with nobody. There's nobody there, it's just me. And then like I kept bringing people to see it. Like we're gonna go see Seed of Chucky. It's amazing. I think I saw that 6 times. Like
How many friends did you have left after that?
uh very few, because there's a lot of people like, why did you take me to see this? I'm like, because it's amazing. Why don't you see how amazing this is?
Yeah, that's the litmus test right there.
Okay, I will say the grooming thing, I think that does come back a little bit for the series because once again, he's reaching out to vulnerable kids
Mhm.
who, um, and even like he even uses like his kid's excuse like when he's reaching one kid, he's like, "Oh well, I have a kid who's queer. Like I can understand you.
Uh,
Like I can communicate with you."
yep.
And like he that first season is really him working on this one kid. Like he's gonna get him under his fold. That kind of comes back a little bit.
I'm I'm really looking forward to it. I've heard nothing but good things about the series. I love that Mancini basically has just gotten kind of free reign to do whatever
Yeah.
weird stuff he wants. That makes me really happy. And I've heard really good things about the series. So well, once I get caught up on the last of these increasingly absurd movies, I'm looking forward to digging into that one.
What's like what's the when you talk about researching these things, what's like the weirdest movie or book like your research has drawn you to? Like the most unexpected.
Oh man. Um, I don't know. Let me see if I can even look up the title. Um, I don't know if this is the weirdest, but it's the first thing that comes to mind. There was this movie about these two clowns. Um, I think it's called The Last Circus, if I'm
Okay.
looking at this right. So the pitch, just to set the stage here, the IMDb pitch is a young trapeze artist must decide between her lust for Sergio, the happy clown, or her affection for Javier, the sad clown, both of whom are deeply disturbed.
Oh no.
And so the entire movie um, is in the circus with this kind of lurid love affair, this triangle, and everyone is messed up. There's no one who is normal in the circus. Everyone has major issues, and they're just the clowns are basically at war with each other and trying to make each other's lives miserable because they're in this love triangle. The thing that's just wild about this though is it's played completely deadly serious. Like this not is not like a wink and a nod like hey we know this is ridiculous kind of clown movie. Like it is played with the just Shakespearean levels of tragedy.
Okay, I love that
And
though.
it's so
Like that makes
bizarre.
me
It's
more like
yeah, no, it is wonderful. I watched it was one of those things where I'm watching it with a friend and we had just picked it kind of at random because I had that clown episode, I think or episode that blog last year. It was all about killer clowns. And so we're just going through and kind of looking at different things that had come up in that research. And it's like, hey, let's watch this one. And so we're watching it, and I'm sitting here just enraptured. And I keep like looking over, and my friend is just watching it with this look like we, the credits roll. It has just this bombastically over the top tragic ending, and she's just like looking at me. She's like, "What did we just watch?" I don't know, man. I don't know, but I'm into it. It's very good. Um, Another movie I can think of that had a very similar response from the same friend. Bless her heart, she just keeps signing up to watch horror movies with me. I don't know why. Um, but we watched a little indie horror film called My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It To, I think is what the title is.
okay, I haven't watched it yet, but I have heard of that one.
Oh my god, it's so good. It's achingly sad. Just go into it kind of bracing yourself for that. It is much more sad than horrifying. But it's really, really good. You know, you've got adult siblings that are trying to take care of the youngest in the family in isolation, and the youngest happens to be a vampire, and that's causing a lot of logistical problems because you have to keep feeding him. And vampirism in this film is treated again kind of as like a chronic illness. Like his vampirism is a disability as opposed to like a supernatural strength,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. I'd never seen that particular treatment done before. So I was really, really enjoyed that. But again, I finished it and just looked over. My friend was like, "Okay, I'm picking the movie next time. You're done. You're cut off for a while." Fair, all right.
Yeah, I love when you because I'll do that sometimes. Like I'll be like, oh, I've heard of this one thing, like, and can't out watch it, and she's like, what was that? But I love it when it's something bizarre, and then she's like, that was amazing. I'm like, right, it was.
That's always the best feeling. You occasionally you find the gems and then they're just kind of crowd pleasers, and you're like, yeah, I have winnowed my social circle down to a bunch of freaks, so now everyone enjoys these movies with me. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Um, well, I know you're working on something new at the moment, right? Like it's like what you got?
Yeah. Yeah. So in the pipes, um, I've got a work in progress. The original working title was Skin Thief. Um, and I had a early kind of rudimentary draft up on Wattpad once upon a time. So I took that down, I've just completely torn it to bits, restarted the whole thing. We'll probably end up retitling it because in the interim period, there's been a short story collection by Susan Palumbo. I think that's how it's pronounced, which is also titled Skin Thief, and I don't want to steal any of that glory. So real title TBD. But the basic pitch is that you've got a kind of young, recently having gotten viral attention musician who falls into kind of a unhealthy situationship with a music producer, who is kind of slowly exerting control on her life and just forcing her into more and more isolation. And he ends up discovering they're out in this beach house. It's in the height of COVID, so they're completely socially isolated. And he brings home this girl, who his explanation of how he came by the situation doesn't make a ton of sense. Um, and so Moira is the musician. She's not completely buying what he's selling, but doesn't know what else to think. But it's basically revealed that this girl is a Selkie, which is
Oh, okay.
a person who can shapeshift into a seal. And if you take their seal skin whenever they're not wearing it and being a seal, then they're basically beholden to you. You know, you're the myth is that these guys would take the steal the skins from the Selkies, and then they would have to marry them until they could find their skin and then take off back into the ocean again. And so now the two of them are pretty much being held hostage by this producer in different ways, but in kind of a similar vibe. And they kind of have to work together in order to be able to get out of that circumstance. Um, so I'm working on the final draft of that right now, which has been just a horrific uphill clog. Like this entire year has just, especially since the start of the summer, has just been one like weird, crazy disaster happening after another in my life. And so every time I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna write, I'm gonna focus, and then just something will blow up. And like, okay, well, I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna write, I'm gonna focus. But here's hoping. We're about halfway through the final rewrite right now. So
Okay,
we're
yeah.
aiming for the end of the year.
Fingers crossed, because yeah, that's how it seems to go. It's like whenever like a crazy thing happens or a tragedy happens, it's almost like life's like, okay, well, let's go ahead and pile this on you real quick. We're gonna get the next 5 years of disasters out right now. Like,
Right. And you know what? If it will hold to that, if I could just like pre-buy all of the misfortunes now and then be clear for a couple of years, like that's fine. I'll take it.
yeah,
But yeah.
yeah, 2025 and 2026 are smooth sailing.
Yeah. Yeah. We're gonna try to manifest that.
Um, that's that's awesome. I can't wait to read it. Like, um, that's something I've talked to other writers on here about is whenever you write like the old draft of something and it's do you rescue it? Do you go back or do you just
Mhm.
leave it in the dust? And I don't know, anyone so far that I've talked to who has like rescued the old work has not regretted it. They're like, no, no, I
Mhm.
was able to do something amazing with it.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm a little bit of a hoarder with ideas, I think. I have a tough time letting them go. Like River of Souls actually originally started off in a very, very different format. It was my first novel. I started writing it in college, and at the time, it was kind of a geopolitical thriller about like a new American Civil War and the lines that were drawn, and all of these people in this like underground resistance movement, and some of the thematic bones of it are still kind of prevalent. I just kind of yoinked the characters out of that setting dusted them off, made them all zombies, and threw them into a new setting. The thing that is funny about that is that in the very first early iteration of this, which again I was writing in college and was a young and earnest ideologue, which is when no one should be writing in dystopia, but here it was. It was irrelevant to the plot at that point that a lot of the characters in the kind of underground resistance were queer, because obviously, they're going to be on one side of this thing, and then there's going to be a lot of conservatives on this other side. And so I was kind of drawing these party lines then, and this was weirdly prescient in 2004. Um, Look where we are now. But anyway, and
Yay!
so when I ported them over into the new setting, I didn't change anything about any of the characters aside from making little zombies. And so, like, half of the cast is queer for no discernible reason. They just are. And it's like, that seems right. That fits. We'll
Yeah,
just leave it.
I
Yeah.
like it. Yeah. No, I absolutely wrote like in college and just after like this really long like young adult fantasy thing, and it was bad. But I had a few good ideas in there, and I've cannibalized that thing so much. Like every few years, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that one part was neat. I'm just gonna go ahead and take that. Like I'm just stealing bones from that corpse, well
Oh,
into my
yeah.
40s.
Absolutely. That's, you have to, just go back to the source. I always also though get deeply afraid, and this is a stupid thing to be afraid of because everyone does it, but I always worry that I'm just going to end up writing the same book over and over. Like I get a certain set of themes that I just can't get out of, and I'm just going to keep writing iterations of those same themes forever. Which, if you're smart and you're thinking about that, you're like, yes, Tiana, that's called branding. But no, I've got to reinvent the wheel every time. So I try to not, once I catch myself doing something a couple of times, okay, put it down, find something new to write about. So for a while, I was just in a real bad relationships rut. Like, just all of my books were about toxic relationships. And like, okay, you get one more of those, and then you got to do something else. So that's in the hopper down the way. But the last toxic relationship book, maybe I'll title it that.
Yeah.
But and then, for a while I was on just a big grief kick, which I don't think I can get out of that. I don't think it's really possible to write horror without writing about grief. Like,
Yeah.
75% of horror is going to be about grief, whether you like it or not. So, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you can get away from grief and death, and no matter what genre or how you're approaching it, it's there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. I've got one of my other drafts that's up on Wattpad right now. I think it's basically the last thing that I have that's up, that's free and available and anybody can read it, and it's exclusive to the platform, is called Ashes Ashes. Which, speaking of books with a small and elite readership, there's a handful of people that have read it. Well, there's a decent number because Wattpad numbers, I think it's like 10,000 reads or something. But occasionally I'll get messages about it of people that are like, "This is amazing." And well, was it though? I'll come back. I'll fix it later. But the pitch on that is basically this group of kind of former best friends, like that really tight knit social circle that you have in your teens, in
Yeah.
your 20s. And they were all going to college and they were all really tight. And then they've all kind of drifted apart and they're all now just tired 30 somethings, but they have to get back together for a funeral because a member of their group has passed away. And so they all have to go up into the mountains and scatter their ashes and have like this big blow up party because they all promised they were going to do that. Except now they all kind of hate each other because there's just so much water under the bridge. And then people start dying, and no one really knows who's responsible. And so, dummy me, I was trying so hard to just write like a classic slasher, like just gonna
Yeah.
formulaic slasher. We got this. And then I made all of my characters way too sympathetic for a slasher. And so I'm like writing it, and it's like, oh, this is so gory, and oh, this is so sad. And I just kept making myself sad every time I killed somebody. It's like, I might not have the stomach to write slashers. I don't know.
Which that sounds amazing to me, like because that's like I love slashers, but at the same time, sometimes they get to be, which like you don't care about people; they're just props essentially, just dolls that can get decapitated. So I don't, I have not read Ashes to Ashes, so I'm gonna have to because I love the idea that it's a slasher, but my heart's gonna break each time somebody dies. Like, all right, let's do it. Like a feel bad
Report
time
back.
of the
Let me know
year.
how that goes.
Well, thank you again for coming on here. This has been awesome. Um,
Yeah.
and anybody watching, listening, um, pick up like if you want, zombies that'll break your heart, River Souls, House of Lazarus. If you want um Everest horror that will break your heart, Neverest. Like just there's a theme. Like she's gonna get you.
Yeah. Horror that will break your heart. I'm stealing that for my new tagline.
Yes, we're gonna branding.